those glossary terms, Jordan. Uh, and so I wanted to kind of hit on what that was. So according to the Tate Modern, activist art is a term used to describe art that is grounded in the act of doing and addresses political or social issues. Um, Activist art can look a lot of different ways, just like art can look a lot of different ways. But activist art kind of situates itself right next to what is referred to as socially engaged practice. And socially engaged practice describes art that is collaborative and often participatory and involves people in the medium or material of the work. Socially engaged practice can be associated with activism because it often deals with political issues or social concerns and access. So this image right here is a really lovely example of socially engaged art. It's a piece by Hank Willis Thomas called The Truth Booth. And so you walk in and you do a 2-minute video and you can talk about whatever you want. And then that work is assembled. And so that's where we see that idea about the audience becoming the collaborator or the co-conspirator, as it were, the co-creator. So socially engaged art has a lot of subcategories. Like if we get into the art historical definitions, it kind of filters out, umbrellas out. And under that umbrella is community art. And community art is artistic engagement that is based in a community setting. It is characterized by interaction, dialogue, and community-driven initiatives. And that part about community-driven initiatives is really important because of that community drive. The work can often address social justice issues or concerns. It can address issues of access, policy, education, and more. An example of that is the $100 Bill project that was by artist Mel Chin. And for over a decade, he did work to bring attention to lead poisoning in Louisiana. And he did that by having people from all around the country color these $100 bills. And then he assembled it all and they took it to Washington, D.C. to advocate for funding to do lead remediation in larger cities. So it was quite an epic event. They even got a fake, or not a fake one, they got a real like cash truck that locked up and had uniforms and the whole thing. So it was pretty neat. So in order to give you a sense of where I come from in my practice and why anti-ageist work has kind of embedded itself in what I do and why a place like Keswick was a place that I've felt moved to work and engage with, I want to kind of tell you where I started. So as I mentioned, I have a bachelor's in painting from Pacific Northwest College of Art. And Portland is quite a activist city. Back in the day, George Bush the first called it Little Beirut on the news because of its regular protesting. If you were watching the news in 2020, it had some of the largest protests during the summer of George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I often had peers participating in protests, and so I would often make work in response to that. And this was a painting about a peer who had been kettled against a fence. Kettling is a police tactic to enclose people in a space during a protest, or just because. But specifically, it's a tactic used during protests. And he was recounting how he felt about that, and I asked if I could make a painting about it. Other things that I was making work about during this period were the financial crisis. I had just started working in higher education. And I was watching the ripple effects socially and the kind of uncertainty. And I felt compelled to make work about that. So for my entire artistic career, I've been really interested in making artwork that deals with what's happening in the world. So I said that I worked in higher ed, but I worked in the youth and pre-college program in higher ed. And I started as a teacher, and I really loved working with the youth program. It influenced my entire undergraduate thesis and how I thought about education and art and what art meant in terms of working with people. And it's the power that art had in a space to direct thinking, to bring up new ideas. And so I started as a teacher, but then I eventually became a program administrator, and I ran the Pacific Northwest College of Art's youth and pre-college program for a decade. And an interesting fact about that is that I ran the youth and pre-college program, but they also put me in charge of all the 50+ classes. So Anything that wasn't matriculating students or professionals, whatever that was deemed by the college, I was put in charge of. And we tried to make a space that was really participant driven and really enriched people's skill building and interests. And ultimately, it was a celebration of creativity. Fun fact, that's me in that sloth costume. That's the college's mascot. And so we'd host the intergenerational events. We'd host summer camps, Saturday classes, portfolio development. But I also was completely in charge of all the painting and drawing classes that were facilitated for older adults. And people felt compelled to say the weirdest things to me about the young folks that I was working with and the older adults that I was working with. We had a faculty member that was in her 80s that taught in the youth program and then started facilitating these classes with older adults. And people would be like, well, why do we even have that class? Like, those aren't college students. That's not the constituency we should be serving. People also made terrible comments to me about just youth being at a college. Like, that's not for them. Their work doesn't mean anything. Anything outside the boundaries of like capital F fine art at the college level, and like envisioning, matriculation age students like as being only people between the ages of like 18 and 35. It was startling to me and really immediately put into focus for me that that these perceptions around ageist kind of ideas about who is an artist and whose learning is valued, it like really affected me. And I became very active in advocating at the college for attitudes that were different. And it was a constant fight, if I'm being completely honest. So after I did that work for 10 years, I moved to Baltimore to go to grad school. And one of the first things I did was talk to people in East Baltimore, where my community art program was housed. And the first thing that was mentioned to me was that all of these programs were being developed for youth, like youth development classes, like children and teens, but not a lot of art programming was being developed for people that were 50 plus. And so I was like, okay, hear a need, see a need, fill a need. And so for a year, we hosted these classes at the Men and Family Center, which was a service provider. It did things like help people with money management or resource development. They had a recidivism program. And they also hosted art classes on Tuesdays and Thursday nights with me. So we did a project around creative play. So we would have a game night one night a week, and then we would make artwork where we played with the materials. And so it was a space for people to really explore and engage and have fun and not be worried about making a perfect product. But what we found is that people made beautiful things because they were given the space to do so, and there weren't any presumptions made about their capacity or their ability. One of the people who participated in the project, Miss Agnes, said, I've never done anything like this in my entire life. I've never made something and had a show before. And she was 92 years old at the time. We had a day of play and we had an art exhibition, and it was an intergenerational event. And it ended in a Michael Jackson dance party. It was quite epic. But like being in that space with people as young as 3 and people all the way up into their 90s, it just showed me that this is like art spaces can be a space for everyone. And that people deserve that space. So it continued to incite my interest in the work. At the same time, I was making a lot of artwork about education, and specifically art education and the power that educators hold in the spaces that they facilitate. For me, my artistic practice and my activist practice and my professional life as an educator all intertwined like a big DNA strand. I don't separate them. And so if I'm thinking about something in my professional life, I'm making artwork about it. And this is some of that work. Fun fact, that desk with all the pencils coming out, those were all hand sharpened. It took me 3 months and I have a callus still on my finger from it. But all of these desks were from St. Wenceslas, which is a church that was right next to MICA Place, which was where I lived and worked in community at the time. And there were people in the neighborhood that had gone to that school when it was parochial school, and their graffiti was on the desks. And when we invited folks from the neighborhood into the exhibition for our thesis, they were like, "Oh, I remember," you know? And so it was also just a really lovely conversation to have and be like, this is something that exists. It's still relevant. It's still valuable. And your affiliation with it is important. My second year of grad school, I worked as a Keswick teaching fellow. There's a fellowship called the Libby Bowerman Teaching Fellowship, which is awarded to 1 to 2 grad students from MICA a year. And I was one of the folks that was lucky enough to receive it. And I got to work for a year at Keswick teaching art classes and facilitating open art studio. And it was a transformative experience, because what I found is that Keswick had the interest and the resources to put their money where their mouth was, insofar as like making a space that was truly accessible and truly inclusive for everyone. And I ended up structuring my thesis around this work. Most of the people that I worked with who took my art classes were retired educators and retired people who worked in like, you know, things like social work or nonprofit work. And so they really informed my what I was thinking about. We made at Keswick this piece together, and it has all of their feedback written into and embedded into the piece. If we get a closer look, all of those pieces of paper and pieces of tape, they're painted. And then all of the text is from their feedback, and we worked on it for months with them writing bits and pieces about what they want to do as students in an art space and how they want to be treated. You know, and one participant said, you know, when I came here, you know, I didn't think that anybody would care to ask me that question. And I don't know if that was singularly because of how they think about themselves in art, as how they thought about themselves as an artist at the time, or if it was about something related to these mythologies around age and learning. But I have a feeling it was a little bit of both. But you know, it just affirmed for me why the work was important. So Bell Hooks has this quote. Bell Hooks is an activist and thought leader, and she says that the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. And she was always advocating for academic institutions and places that hold this learning space to be spaces that become activated and radical. So if I had to like synthesize where my activism sits in relationship to anti-ageist work, I would say that my work is to create a space where everyone is seen, honored, and valued for their creative potential, whatever their lived experience, to advocate and enact meaningful change to curriculums, administrative policies, and structures of access, and to embed anti-ageist intersectional approach in organizing so that all people are included and meaningful change can occur. So what does that look like? So when I became the artist in residence, I started in 2019 at Keswick, and one of the first things I did was the Power Portrait Project, and it asked a question of my predominantly like African American and Indigenous participants about, and all women identifying folks, about what does it mean to envision yourself holding power, and what does a powerful person look like? And that's one of the first projects I did, because so much of, I think, these ideas around perception of aging or just other isms is rooted in like whether we get to see ourselves or not, and whether we get to see ourselves reflected in the way we want to be seen. And so the Power Portrait Project was an integral kind of introduction to that. This particular participant made a piece. She was pursuing a PhD in theology during this period. And so she made her Power Portrait Project about a relationship to her spirituality. this particular participant is a published writer and continues to publish and write now. She and I are still in contact, and she wanted to really celebrate that. And so she had written a story about Blue Willow, China, and then embedded text from her story around her. This particular person right here, she was really coming into her space as an artist and really wanted it to be about a celebration of the aesthetic language that she was building and how powerful she felt making art and being seen as an artist. So I continued to work at Keswick for 5 years. I just finished up my time literally like the last week of December. And while I was there, a lot of my work at Keswick was about supporting people to understand that there are no limitations to their capacity, whether it's art making or serving their community or to exercise their creative voice, and that they can be a creative, active change agent, especially as it relates to their own health. Keswick's Wise and Well Center was kind of the place in which the art program was housed or is housed. And that work is really about addressing the ways that you can fully flesh out someone's health journey and give them access to resources for things like physical health, mental health, financial health, and intellectual health. And art can touch all of those different things. Their mission work is also around connection, empathy, inclusion, and advocacy. And for me, that's really important to share because those are all things that are essential in activist work in educational spaces or activist work, period. So some of the things I did was we hosted a curatorial program, and we really tried to focus on intersectional engagement, things that would start conversations, things like Black womanhood and art as an act of healing. We had Francisco Loza come and show his work that's inspired by indigenous artists from Mexico. A lot of work about resilience, especially during the pandemic. A lot of people made work about overcoming. And work about memorial. There's me in the background being like, hey, photobombing my own exhibition. We also hosted classes and really centered curriculums that were about a decolonized perspective. So highlighting Black, Indigenous artists, Black, Brown, and Indigenous artists, and women identifying artists. This particular collage is by a community participant who participated in our Romare Bearden collage day. And so we just had a huge collage party, and we talked about how collage can be used. And we showed things like Swoon's activist posters or people who were inspired by Romare Bearden to share that work. In 2021, Keswick partnered with Art Against Ageism to explore perceptions of age and age positivity through various projects. And I have to say, this was kind of as I'm talking and telling you this story, like, clearly I've been thinking about age and perceptions of age across the spectrum of a person's lived experience for a long time. But working with Art Against Ageism really crystallized that a lot for me, and how important it was and how more intensified it needed to be in my own practice, if I'm being completely honest. So we worked on a variety of projects, including the Tree of Life, which was our first project. It sat in our Wise and Well Center for months, and then we moved it over to the residential side of the house and the main part of the nursing home. And we had tons of people participate. We had avenue for people to submit feedback online. We had different question prompts on the cards, inspired by Yoko Ono's Wish Tree. And people could give feedback around these different questions about aging, like, do you feel judged for your age? How do you feel about being your age? I don't know if I'm quoting those accurately, but Jordan, you may know. But it was a really powerful thing, and we got a lot of different feedback. And as a person living with that installation that was spearheaded by Megan Jordan, it was really cool to see how people responded to it. And a lot of times people would just come in and want to talk to me about this work, like the actual physical installation, but also like how important anti-ageist work is. and like how their experiences of their own ageism. I had conversations with staff about how they felt about things. One of my coworkers was like, yeah, like I still think it's weird that elementary schools still like do the thing where it's the first 100 days of school and they dress up as an old person, like 5-year-olds dress up as an older adult, right? Because it's all rot and stereotypes. And so I got to have a lot of really interesting conversations. And one of the, I think, really amazing projects that occurred out of this partnership was the Chronicles of Age dramatic play performance, where we, like Megan Jordan got that, was it the MCAS grant, the Maryland State Art Council grant, and it funded artists to come and work with us. And we hosted, I think, like 8 or 9 classes over 3 months. And people wrote their own monologues or wrote their own prose about aging and their experience of aging, and then performed it, and we recorded it. And it was a really lovely experience, and it was an influential experience. And what I mean when I say influential experience is that we use that video and that work in part of our training for incoming art therapy interns and like new art fellows, because I became in charge of the fellowship like years after doing it. And it inspired artist Sam Jessner to make the Art of Aging wall that we installed in the summer of 2023. And this was like a campus-wide project. Staff participated, residents participated, and community health members participated, and they shared their thoughts about aging or just shared stories from their life around how they have moved through their lived experience. And then they were photographed, and they had all of the decisions around this work, like from the photos that were taken and which ones were chosen to how their work was displayed and cropped and everything. And so it became a really, like, in terms of community art, it's like an all hands on deck, everything being driven by the community members. And it was a really beautiful project. Work like this allows things like this to happen. This is the recognition walkway at Keswick that it was installed in 2023. And this work this installation celebrates the important role that key stakeholders play at Keswick, but not just members of the board who have helped shepherd Keswick through different eras, but also the staff that do the mission work at Keswick every day. A lot of the staff that were featured in portraits on this wall were people that had worked at Keswick for 30, 40 years. And so to create a space where you turn one corner and you see residents, staff, and community members talking about their experience, and then you turn another corner and you're seeing all the people who help make that work happen, it's a powerful thing. And when art is allowed to be in a space and people get to see collective effort, and people also get to see the folks who make things happen, or who the work is about, it's a beautiful thing. And it was really wonderful to be a part of. One of the things we started during the pandemic, when I couldn't be in a space with my students in an art room, was we started these art history classes. And they were virtual for a while, and then they became hybrid. But this gets to the heart of these ideas around decolonized perspectives or intersectional perspectives in art education and activism, which is this idea that everybody's story is important to tell, and being seen in the world is important to talk about. And so as I continue to work with art against ageism, these art history lessons, for lack of a better term, became much more focused. And like, I was asking myself, like, is this a person who my folks would be interested in? Who do they want to learn about? Like, what conversations am I presuming that people want to have, or do they actually want to have, right? So I was talking to my a family member, Don Despain, and I was telling him about these ideas around art history and activism and education. And he said, and I quote, "People presume what I want to talk about or what I will remain quiet about what's happening in the world, as if it will harm me or offend my sensibilities. He's 76. He's and he says that his experiences around ageism are mostly specific to what presumptions people have about like what he cares about or what his interests are. He said, just because I'm older does not mean I'm not paying attention to the present moment. I'm just as political now as I was in the 1960s. And so I thought, okay, let's talk about trans perspectives on gender and power. Let's talk about indigenous artists when we explore visibility. Let's talk about LGBTQIA plus culture in art, or art during times that are really challenging, like times of war, and to not be afraid of challenging conversations. Another thing that Art Against Ageism really helped me formulate was this like issue of representation. We had started featuring some artists that were active and older, but we were trying to tell a wide swath of stories with the art history classes. And what eventually happened was that through that focused engagement, it was really about like, how do we make space for older adults to see themselves in this art history space? And that really affected how we curated the program, what curriculum we chose to do. And it really initiated a lot of incredible conversations, really intense, deep ones sometimes, but beautiful ones. So Kehinde Wiley, who's a famous artist, he made this painting of the presidents from the continent of Africa. He said that art is about changing what we see in our everyday lives and representing it in such a way that it gives us hope. And so when I think about art and art education, I think that a really huge component of activist work in art and art education is making things visible. Like if a person, an older adult, or anybody can see themselves in a famous work of art, if they can see themselves reflected in the media, if they can see their stories being written down, and not beholden to stereotypes, or like prescribed ideas of what pop culture says that they're supposed to look like, behave like, act like, then we change the world because we change minds. We open up an idea of what a person has the capacity to do and be. So I think that finally, one of the most essential aspects of my work when I was the artist in residence was training other artists to do the work in a way that was thoughtful and ethical, and work around anti-ageist curriculum and that attempt to not presume about a person's interests or capacity to be important. It's really funny, like when I hear myself say like, oh, like don't presume what you think someone's interested in or what they want to do or what they have the capacity to do, but people do it all the time. And I sometimes still have to stop myself, like when my parents on the phone and I'm like, just send it to me, I'll fix it. It's like, no, I'll like, let's work on this together. I know that you have the capability and the capacity to figure out this technological challenge, and that's how deeply ingrained ageism is in everyday life, is like not having patience for people, not giving space for people to share what their wants are. And I think it's part of my work as the artist in residence was like saying like, yeah, try the Canva project. Like just because you think that older adults don't use Canva doesn't mean that they don't, like they probably do. Like just because something involves technology, just because something involves like a subject matter that may seem a little bit challenging, like put it out there. You're making the decision for people. So one thing I also found was that ageism and ableism are really tightly intertwined in nursing home spaces. And it was interesting to deal with because sometimes I would have these conversations with my incoming teaching fellows or my incoming interns, like because there was trepidation, and it's like, hey, you gotta reframe that for yourself. A person's not just their age, they're not just Their disability, if they happen to have one, they contain multitudes, and you're putting them in a box, and don't do that. So yeah, that was like the everyday, like, you know, like hearing a comment and being like, hey, that's elder speak, don't do that. Like intervening. So my work as a fellowship and internship mentor was really about talking to them about being participant driven, not making presumptions, addressing ageist language, addressing myths about older adults, um, and about what they want to do or how they use something, and about those things that I was talking about relationships to ageism, and also ageism's like health impacts. Like if you're constantly infantilizing or belittling someone, whether you know it or not, through microaggressions, uh, you're going to affect them, you're going to harm them, right? And how a class space, especially an art class space, shouldn't be that space. It should be an activated space where we debunk those myths and we don't fall into tropes about who people are. So when we as educators deconstruct our own perceptions of aging and remove presumptive, often stereotype laden perceptions about older adults we create a space for age positive curriculums. And I would say that's not just educators, that's everybody. If you're working, especially in an aging services space, you got to deconstruct your perceptions of that. And, but it's so embedded that it's just startling when and where I come across it. Um, so that's the main crux of stuff. Jordan, do you wanna poke me or
Wow.
ask me
I
questions or something?
mean, you are awesome and a wealth of information. I do want to open it up for some questions. I know that you do have some artists to consider that I do want you to get a chance to share. So if you don't mind just running through them and kind of just like, just showing, we all can look them up on our own. Um,
Yep.
and then I'll get some questions out and then ask the group some questions. So one of the things, and maybe we can toggle among the artists to consider while we talk about these things. You talk about holding space for learning and talking about institutions that hold space for learning. And we don't often think about senior living as an institution that holds space for learning. Like we think about institutions where you go and learn, like colleges. How did you navigate institute? And you worked at a nursing home with an outreach center.
Mhm.
So how did you navigate creating this space for learning when it may not have been there before?
A lot of advocacy, a lot of like, this is what we need and this is what is important. Like, a lot of uh, being like, I know that we're understaffed, but please help this person prepare to come to class today on the nursing home side so that they can participate in this because it's important to them and they want to be there. Um, I would say, like, from the nursing home perspective, the biggest thing I did was organize, like, to be like the a moment of art education or a moment of learning or a moment to engage in critical inquiry is not arbitrary. In
Mm.
fact, it's good for your health, like, and um, like moving through that in a way that doesn't center my anger, but prioritizes the people that it serves, right? On the community health side, it was really about being like, how are we making things person centered and really making choices that are driven by their interests and not, not, falling into like prescriptive stuff that happens at other like spaces. Often people think of, oh, art at a nursing home or art for older adults is craft, and it can be craft, but craft has a beautiful long tradition. Craft is the root of fine art, let's be real. But also, like, capital F fine art is something that everybody has the capacity to do, and you need to allow for that in a way where it's open and accessible, and a learning space is that space
I have
because it's not
never
laden with stress and anxiety and um, hierarchy. Sorry.
I've never heard someone say craft is the root of fine art.
I mean,
Um, we always talk about how like activity and life enrichment is important, but it's not art, artistic activism. Like it has its place, engagement is important, but these are different. But this is true. Like this is a place where fine art can happen, and so often we don't bridge that second part. We don't take this play and make it something as a collaboration for something finer to share. Um, and so also, and I'm going to get through these quickly. You talk about empowerment
mhm.
and doing harm. You say, and we do have this tendency to do for and not with, especially with older adults, where we just like, I'm having a problem instead of going in and saying, well, let's go through the steps because here's how you work with this. We do for and we disempower instead of empower.
Right.
How did you, and I appreciate your comment, Oliver, about agency workers and improper staffing. How do you train someone or even work with someone or just set the boundary with someone who is temporary in your space to say this is not a disempowerment space. This is a space where we are like I'm sure you had those moments where someone had someone help someone in, and instead of giving them the space to struggle, just and I'm sure you had to go over and correct them. And how do you do that?
Um, it varied, it was like what I knew about the person who was helping, and then like sometimes it was like full redirection, but more often it was like pulling a person aside and being like, so and so can absolutely do that themselves, especially if we put this adaptive on the brush, and like getting them to think about how we make things accessible through resources as opposed to do things for people, and also really leaning into like what does the resident want or what does the community member want? What do they want? Like, you're having trouble mixing that color because you're having low vision today. Okay, I'm going to sit next to you and we're going to work on this together until you tell me that it's exactly what you want. I'm going to show you how to do it once and you're going to be able to do it yourself next. You know? But like also walking people through with the idea of being like it's okay as an educator and an activist and an artist to be uncomfortable for a bit because someone's not immediately getting it, and to know that if you are present they will get to where they need to go. You have to give them the space to do that.
Mm.
And so a lot of my work was like, in the training phase with interns and fellows, or even just we had high school volunteers come in. We had volunteers from all different organizations, college students, like retired folks. They would all come in and we would all have the same conversation, like, you know, like how would you want, how would you want to be treated in this space? You know, lead with that. You know,
Wow.
so
I will open it up to questions because I mean I love talking to Sarah whenever I get a chance to talk to Sarah. I always walk away with something different. And I've been taking notes. I've just walked away with so much today. Oliver, your hand is up. I'll give you a second. Go ahead.
One thing I was going to mention is, like, in terms of like art-wise, is that is in October we did an intergenerational art shows that how we can bring people with different ages. So
mhm.
we did that in London, and it's been a really good experience. But one of the things I also was going to mention what we've done recently is we did a campaign called "Not Afraid of My Birthday" to raise an awareness about ageism, and we did it as a protest in Oxford Street. And another thing we've also been doing is like a guerrilla tactics where we've been putting stickers on bus stops, line bikes, maps, where people are looking where to get around, and also on tubes on how we can raise an awareness about ageism. And they have like a QR code, and when you scan the QR code, it will take you to the WHO website, and that's what they've been definitely doing. But one thing I was going to mention, Sarah, is would you ever think about considering doing an art show in London? Because that would be a good place to raise an awareness about ageism.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Let's say, I'm sure that would be really cool.
Yeah, I think also too, like it would be really meaningful for people to participate in because it opens up. Like I am aware that I'm like a white woman from the United States, and I have a inherently Western perspective, and there's lived experience around aging and ageism and age positivity around the world. So opening up that conversation for more dialogue, I think, is important, and crossing borders does that.
One thing I forgot to also mention as well, in the UK recently, I really love somebody, it's also on the newspaper as well, where they've been doing a campaign called Are You Ageist? And there's a website in the UK, and it's called Age Without Limits, and they've been doing a big campaign. So as I said, they've been putting things on billboards, and I've even seen it on the newspaper and the front covers. Like every day, they seem to be putting something called, I'll show you what it's called. It's called Are You Ageist? And if you go to the website, it's called Age Without Limits.
Thank you. I'm gonna get to someone else. Thank you so much, Oliver. Michelle, your question?
Yeah, thank you. Sarah, this was such a great talk and so inspiring, and I feel like just so fired up by the whole thing and your talent and your perspective and the inclusion of people and providing space. One thing, and by the way, like I am so down with what you were saying, how it's just the ageism and ableism that comes into play when people want to do the work for someone else. They're assuming that they can't do it, right? Like, or they want so much for it to be a certain way that they want to just jump in and create art for them versus listening to them and letting them experience the process. But so anyway, my point is that ageism and ableism intersection that you talked about is so deep that it's so deep a lot of times in the older folks themselves, right?
Yeah.
In these communities. And so I know for a fact sometimes people fear retaliation, right? Or they're just so institutionalized, right? That they just, okay, this is how it is, right? Like this is the life. So anyway, I love that you talked about, opening up the conversation, asking questions, being present and just giving them their space. I love that. And you need to write a book.
Thank you.
That's a
In all your
great
spare
idea.
time.
I have several people that have mentioned that. So.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. I might work with you on it because it is like so my language and I just love your work. Anyway,
Thank you.
thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions that hasn't already asked one? I just want to give the space to ask. If you are working on something or there is an opportunity that you'd like to connect with us, you can always connect with us at artagainstageism.org. You can email me at jordan@artagainstageism.org. You can email Meg at meg@artagainstageism.org. Please drop your email, drop your messages, anything, and then I just wanted to give you some space to show some artists to consider. One thing that I love about Sara and why Sara is such a huge resource is she always teaches me about artists that I've never heard of, that I'm like, oh, I want to learn everything about this. So I hope that you take away today an artist that you haven't heard of, something you know about, and you're like, oh, I want to explore this.
I'll pull the pictures back up because I'm a visual person, so I always gotta have those pictures. Everybody can see that, right?
Yeah.
All right, beautiful. So the first artist that I'll mention is Jess T. Dugan. Jess is a non-binary artist who documents LGBTQA, non-binary, and trans lived experience in the U.S. And they did a project called "To Survive on the Shore," starting in 2016. And the show is about documenting the stories and photographs or portraits of older trans adults. One of the things that Jess T. Dugan said is that because of the experience of trans life where, you know, there's kind of this idea that it's a, um, like trans people have existed throughout history, but we don't perceive it that way. And so there's not, and it's partly because of this idea that there's not a lot of like documentation of older adults that are trans, right? It's not in the media. It's not, you know, like this project was a very big deal because this was kind of the first collective history taking and making of trans experience in the US from an older adult perspective. And so they worked with Vanessa Fabre, and they traveled the United States, interviewing people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, and capturing their stories. So that's one that I highly recommend. And that particular artist was also part of the inspiration for the photo show that we had, The Art of Aging. Our art therapy student really loved this work and also loved the work of Art Against Ageism and combined these ideas together. Another amazing artist is Theaster Gates, and he's a socially engaged artist out of Chicago, and he does a variety of things, and I'll show you a couple of them. But one of the things he does is he makes paintings with his father, Theaster Gates Sr. His father was a roofer for his entire life, and so he makes paintings with tar, and it pays homage to his father's labors as a roofer when he was growing up. But it also, like, what Theaster Gates says about doing this work is that his father was like over him the whole time, like being like, this is how you do it. I'm going to teach you this process. This is the way to do it with care, the way that makes it like last, that it has longevity. And so it's a really beautiful project. Theaster Gates also started the Stony Island Bank. And so what he's been doing is been purchasing or securing properties in the south side of Chicago, including this 1920s bank, and he's turned it into a community center. And anytime a business closes down in this neighborhood, he acquires material from that business and he archives it so that it's still accessible for people. So we're talking about neighborhoods where hardware stores that had been there for 40 years shut down and the owner loses everything. And Theaster Gates holds it all. So he has the entire collections of Ebony and Jet magazine for anybody to access at any time, huge record collections, a 20,000 set slide from the art history program at the University of Chicago, and it's available to anyone at any time. They also bring artists in, and it's an intergenerational space. Just Seeds is an artist cooperative that is decentralized and works with about 20 to 30 artists, and they produce collective portfolios to raise awareness about various issues. And it's not singularly one issue. Sometimes it's about anti-racist work. Sometimes it's about climate change. And so this is a really wonderful example of how individual artists can move to collectively activate a conversation, and then all of their portfolios are sold in editions, and they raise money for issues related to that work. So they'll donate the thousands of dollars that they make from the sale of these artist portfolios to raise money for the mission or the issue.
I'm gonna jump in. I realize it is 5:58, and so again, thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on and talking to us today. This has been wonderful. I mean, even those three artists creating artwork with tar, that is so cool, which I would have never thought, to create artwork with tar.
Well, it's his father's knowledge, right? He's carrying a legacy.
And then taking it to another occupation.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool. Join us on February 15th. We will be having Sharon Sullivan on, and Sharon will be talking about the amazing installations that she creates. Sharon works with Leading Age and designs all of Leading Age's conferences, which Leading Age is a membership organization for not-for-profit senior living communities or senior housing, as well as aging services. And I tell you what is amazing is we go to other conferences in other fields, and they are sometimes so boring. And what Sharon does is she puts together these amazing art installations that really bring together the awesomeness of working in this field. And it's all just her ideas. She brings these partnerships together and she creates these awesome installations. So we wanted to bring her on and really dig deep and understand what is her process, why does she do this, what is her what really drives her. And so join us February 15th. We'll be sending out emails to everyone and putting in our social. Again, follow us on all socials and on our website at artagainstageism.org. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jordan.